Welcome, everyone, to the OnPoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, MPPs have now fanned out to their ridings, so we'll review what's been accomplished and what's not been during this session of the legislature.
Doug Ford has been in the U.S. this week, making his pitch for Fortress North America. One American governor seems to be listening, but is the Trump administration.
We've had 26 premiers in Ontario since 1867, but only one from Sault Ste. Marie. His name was William Howard Hearst. Hearst's biggest fan will join us in studio, the mayor of the Soo, Matthew Shoemaker.
And in your column, my column, I'll talk about what the premier didn't achieve on his D.C. trip.
And I've got a profile up on the first guy who jumped into the Ontario Liberal leadership race. His name, Dylan Miranda. And yes, if you were wondering, he was named after Bob Dylan.
It's Friday, June 12th, 2026, so let's get to it.
JMM,
Sir.
Final sugar of the season.
Yes, indeed.
Final sugar of the season. And we should just say off the top that because this is our last show this year, we're going long.
Yes.
We're going long, baby.
Yes.
They're giving us extra time.
They've given us a full hour. So some parts that normally get cut off for the TV edit that always make it into YouTube will make it to air for the first time.
We're not going to indulge in our full-fledged nerddom for the entire hour on television.
Well, I mean, I could just keep going forever. But.
Yeah, well, this we know. This we know. Earlier this week, we got a bunch of housekeeping stuff off the top as usual. Earlier this week, I attended a couple of convocations at the University of Toronto, and I'm always fascinated by who either does or does not watch this show. Yeah. Because, while there are young people, obviously, who are interested in politics, I think it's fair to say that most people who are more interested tend to be, people who are 50 plus. They've got mortgages or kids or, a stake in the healthcare system, education system. And so it was delightful when two guys, one named Cody, one named Hamza, both approached me at this convocation at U of T to say, love the podcast, listen to it all the time, never miss it. Yes. So I'm giving them a shout out this week.
Thank you, Cody.
That's a beautiful thing. Now, What are you wearing today exactly? That looks completely nonsensical.
It is somewhat nonsensical. This is a shirt about basically a platypus. I won't try to describe it too much for the audio. If you can see it on TV, you can see it. But it's a duck and a beaver becoming a platypus. So we all walk around the world.
I'm dying to know where this is going.
Putting things into categories. And I'm going meta today. And we put things into categories, and that is a way we make sense of the world. And I love the platypus because the platypus is there to remind us that the categories are all made up. And and it is just something that we construct. And the platypus does not care what you think a mammal should be. It is a mammal, and it lays eggs. It is this aquatic creature that also has poison tips on its legs. It is just this weird grab bag of a creature put together out of spare parts because God got bored one day. And I love it so much. And it is a reminder that not to take categories too seriously. And I would apply this lesson in politics where we say things like you and I will always use terms like left-wing or progressive or conservative or whatever it is. I think it's an important lesson to not take those categories or those labels too seriously. Well, you're a bit more on brand today.
I'm on brand, but not the guy who I thought I'd be. I do mark little things in my calendar to sort of remind myself, oh, this is a good day to wear this T-shirt. This is a good way to wear this T-shirt. And when I saw months ago this date coming, I thought to myself, okay, this is the perfect day to wear Bill Davis. Bill Davis got elected for the first time June 11th, 1959, as a 29-year-old kid from Peel County, as it was then called, where the town of Brampton was. So his first election was 1950. So what does that make it? 67 years ago yesterday. Yeah. Okay, it was his first election. And then one of the most, some people would say wonderful dates on the calendar in terms of legislative accomplishments. Others would say ominous dates on the calendar because he made one of the most fateful decisions in Ontario political history on the 12th of June, this date in 1984, and people who follow the mix of education, politics, and religion who were around at the time will remember this day well because Mr. Davis, as Premier, decided to extend full public funding to the end of high school for the Roman Catholic separate school system. We're going to do a fast history lesson here. When we became Canada in 1867, the original bargain at Confederation was, you folks in Quebec have to publicly fund your Protestant schools, and we folks in Ontario are going to have to publicly fund Catholic schools.
Actually, one small correction. That deal predated Confederation. The Constitution of 1867 says that deal that already existed would remain in place.
Absolutely right. However, the Constitution also says the deal was you had to fund common schools.
Yes.
Common schools. And at the time, that meant up to grade 8. And governments that did not necessarily want to spend more money on more funding for the other school system took that to the bank. And they said, okay, we're only funding to the end of grade 8. That's all we have to do. So from 1867, for 100 years, Ontario only funded the Catholic school system to grade 8. They were in some financial difficulty as a result. And so Bill Davis, when he was the Minister of Education, decided to extend public funding to the Catholic system for grades, I guess, 9 and 10. Okay, that takes you to the middle 1960s. But then the Catholic community continued to lobby for the next couple of decades, saying, come on, our schools don't end at grade 10. The kids obviously stay in for 11, 12, and 13, as we had back in the day. And, if you're going to be fair, you really should fund our school system right to the end of high school. And Mr. Davis, in fact, in 1971, held a press conference in which he said, I have heard from the Catholic community, and we are not going to do that. Yeah. And because Ontario at that time was kind of 90% white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, the WASPs kind of loved how Mr. Davis kind of stuck it to the Catholics, and Mr. Davis, who was the new leader of the Tories in 71, then won a larger majority than he had inherited from John Robarts, and he did it in part on the backs of the Catholic school funding issue,
yes,
which I think always made him feel a little guilty over the years. And as a result, June 12th, 1984, he decided to, after lots of lobbying by the Cardinals over the years, he decided to go all the way to the end, and without necessarily the agreement of his own Minister of Education at the time, decided to extend full public funding to the end of high school for the Catholic system. The Catholic system were thrilled. The public sector system was not. No. And I remember in the lead up to the 1985 Ontario election, Mr. Davis is now retired at this point, the Anglican Archbishop of Toronto, a man by the name of Louis Garnsworthy, at a press conference said, this is how Hitler changed education policy in Germany by decree, and I disagree with how one man can simply make a decision and change the education system of the province. It was a shocking thing to say,
yes.
And even though the policy had sort of been announced almost a year earlier, it did stir up a great deal of angst about the policy. And I guess my last trivia question for you on that date, at the press conference where Louis Garnsworthy said, this is how Hitler changed education policy in Germany, do you know who asked the question that got that response?
Was it Steve Paikin?
You're looking at him, buddy. I tell you, all of that is to say, I should be wearing Bill Davis's shirt today, but I'm not, because of our guest who's coming up later. He's going to talk about William Howard Hearst, the only premier from Sault Ste. Marie, and I thought out of respect to our guest, okay, there we are. I'm wearing William Howard Hearst today, and we'll hear more about him later. Boy, that's a long digression, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm just amazed that we got you to not wear Bill Davis.
Can't have him on every day. There we go. And with that, let's get to issue 1. Well, since this is the final show of this, our 6th, I think, isn't it? 6th season of doing
that
this?
That sounds right. 6th, 7th?
6 or 7, I think. I don't know. We've lost count, actually. Anyway, I'm doing the OnPoli podcast here on TVO. It might be 8, I was just told in my ear. Is that possible? Are we that out of it? We can't remember? Okay, well, whatever. We've been doing this for a bit.
Yes.
So we thought we'd recap some of the major developments of the year heading into what will be an unusually long summer break before the House returns in late October. So, JMM, Where do we begin?
Well, let's talk about some of the things that were accomplished legislatively by the government in this short session. They did, of course, pass a budget, as they must every spring. The budget had a number of measures, including, announcing some of what they've since brought forward, including changes to Billy Bishop Airport, the usual stuff we've talked about before, expanded transit investments, northern highways, that kind of thing. What was not in the budget, which I have argued on our website at tvo.org probably should have been, was the Premier's desire to buy a private jet. The Cabinet bought a private jet and then promptly sold it again when that went down like the proverbial lead balloon, to, I guess, mix my aeronautical metaphors. And that I think really did suck up just so much of the oxygen this spring. That relatively short controversy in terms of the actual time it took, and yet it really dominated the political attention for so long. Of course, one of the other legislative matters that the government did introduce were changes to freedom of information laws. And I was saying on somebody else's podcast, I was on the Progress Canada podcast this week, I was actually surprised at, what I kind of perhaps too cynically thought that the changes to freedom of information law would be too much of an insider issue, too much of a, I hate to use the phrase, but like a Queen's Park bubble issue. And I was surprised at that. A lot of people got that one. It's not quite as flashy as the private jet issue. I will grant that really dominated people's attention, but the change, people understood the sort of retroactively changing freedom of information laws to hide things looks bad and is bad. Then there was the government's announced changes to OSAP, and the arguably very late end to the tuition freeze. Obviously, this is an attempt to right the financial ship of the province's post-secondary education space. Colleges and universities really struggling financially, and so the government is letting them lift their tuitions and but is also changing OSAP from being primarily grant-based to really much more reliant on loans. So yes, they're helping colleges and universities, but students understandably are angry at taking a financial hit here. And finally, I think we got to talk about Billy Bishop Airport, which we're going to talk about a bit more. I think this announcement kind of out of nowhere that the province is going to take over the city's lands and the city's role in governing the airport on Toronto Island, and wants to see it expanded to accommodate larger planes, jets in that airport that has historically never had jets before. There was both the controversy of the announcement and really like seizing power away from the city, and that has now turned into a broader political controversy as well. That's, I think, rounds up everything that we saw in the spring so far.
Well, and in fact, on the Billy Bishop file issue, the focus has now very much moved to the federal government, yes, which of course has 23 of the 24 seats are Liberal MPs, yes, in the city of Toronto, and there is great pressure being brought to bear on those 23 MPs, as in, where are you folks? Are you trying to impress upon the Prime Minister that there's considerable opposition, particularly in the ridings closer to the waterfront, against expanding Billy Bishop Airport? And I have to go back to the private jet for a second. Yes, actually, before I do that, as we sit here taping this today, the Toronto Port Authority is actually having a public meeting at which time they will be, I think, unveiling the names of the federal appointees to the Port Authority's board. So that will give us some indication about, obviously if there are opponents to expansion who are being appointed, that would signal Mark Carney's position on the one hand.
Yes. Or
if there are pro-business types being appointed to the board, that would certainly signal something else.
Yes.
The feds have put out a consultation right now. They've opened, I think, a website for consultation from the public for the next 6 weeks or so, and people are invited to make comments about it. But okay, Olivia Chow has, for a bunch of reasons, not had a lot to say about this. She's against, but hasn't had a lot to say. Yeah. Doug Ford, we know where he stands. We're still waiting to find out what the federal government wants to do about this. And that will be intriguing to find out.
Yeah, that's absolutely going to be one of the things that I watch over the summer. I'm not quite sure how seriously to take the public consultation that has been launched. I think the most cynical take is that this is just a box-checking exercise for the government to say, well, we did a public consultation. The still kind of cynical, but perhaps slightly less cynical perspective is that the government is playing for time. The federal government is playing for time, right? What they really would like to do, and I've offered this hypothesis before on the podcast, is that what they want to do is wait to make any decision after the municipal election. That while the consultation is ongoing, they can continue their policy of silence, if I can put it that way, and they can say, "Oh well, we're waiting for the people to weigh in."
I get a lot of emails about this, and one of the constant points being made in those emails is, how can we have a public consultation when there is no plan about which to be consulted?
No, and worse still, for the proponents of the airport expansion, not only do we not have any specific plan to be for or against, but insofar as there is anything to be for or against, it's the premier. And I very strongly suspect, I get the impression from some people, particularly some quotes that the head of the Port Authority has offered, that he would very much like for people to not understand this as Premier Ford's airport plan, because it's one thing if this is simply offered as a plan being proposed by the Port Authority and certain business interests. You would have one type of argument about that. And to be clear, it's still not guaranteed, right? There's always been a very vocal opposition to even the current island airport. I don't think it's a majority opinion in Toronto, but it has always existed as long as I've lived here. When it is Doug Ford's airport proposal, that is a totally different argument. And the question being put to federal Liberal MPs right now is not like that, hey, there's this plan that has been offered by the Port Authority or business interests or whatever. It's, why are you supporting Doug Ford's airport plan, which has a totally different political valence. Totally
puts it into politics in a different way. Now, another great debate we're going to watch unfold over the summer is the Provincial Liberal Party, which is, of course, back there looking for another leader.
Yes, and so this contest is going to be very interesting to watch as it unfolds. I think we've seen at this point the primary cast of characters, at least in terms of the main leadership candidates, have all announced formally, and they will naturally be making their pitches for the kinds of changes they want to see in Ontario, and there's different ideas about which way the party should move forward. And then there's also going to be stuff that I pay attention to that is kind of like more finicky, nerdy details about the direction of the Liberal Party and reforms within the party. We spoke, I think, last week about the idea of restricting the membership of the Liberal Party to citizens and not letting non-citizens vote for nomination races. That is obviously a controversial proposal. It will be debated not just in this current leadership race, but going forward for some time. But those are the kinds of ideas that I'll be looking to see which candidates are proposing changes, not just to public policy, which of course I find interesting enough, but also these details, because it is ultimately a question of choosing the leader of the Liberal Party and what are they're making a pitch to Liberal members as much as anything else.
Now that may be the biggest story when it comes to elections / conventions / races provincially, but of course we're in a municipal election year.
Yes.
And I know you and I are going to have our eyes on two races in particular. You like the one right next door to the left of us, right?
Yes. In a normal northern-oriented map, Mississauga is the city to the left of us. So that is looking like an interesting rematch of sorts. Carolyn Parrish is currently the mayor of Mississauga, and she won a special election after Bonnie Crombie left that post. And in that election, she prevailed over numerous candidates, but including Alvin Tedjo and Deepika Demirla. They have now both announced that they are running for mayor against Parrish again. And so a bit of a rematch there will be interesting to see.
You know what, though? Carolyn Parrish, I just looked it up.
Yeah.
Carolyn Parrish will only be 80 years old on Election Day, which makes her a spring chicken by Mississauga standards.
By the standards of Hazel McCallion, yes. But, it will be interesting because Tedjo came awfully close in the special election. He was very competitive, and, perhaps it will be perhaps he'll have more support this time. But, Parrish is the incumbent, and I always think that municipal elections are generally easier for incumbents, as all elections are, but particularly municipally. So it would be very interesting there. I don't know, you have a race you're watching?
I'm going a little further left on the map.
Yes.
I think the race in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada is the best municipal mayor's race in the province of Ontario this year.
Yes.
And we've got Andrea Horvath, who's the incumbent mayor, running against Keenan Loomis, who's the candidate whom she barely defeated last time. He was a first-time out-the-gate candidate. And then Rob Cooper, who's a new entrant on city council, won a by-election about 6 months ago and has, or I guess a little longer ago now, maybe 8 months ago, and has made a bit of a splash for himself as well. 3 strong candidates. 1 running for re-election, 2 running to upset the current mayor, and I'm going to have my eye on that one. In fact, I'm already lined up to do a mayoral election debate in the fall. They've already got me signed up to moderate one of those. So I think it's going to be a great race.
All right. And the other one that I want to mention, my hometown, the city of Ottawa. Obviously, Mark Sutcliffe, the mayor there, has announced his re-election campaign. But at least one poll that I've seen from Liaison Strategies shows that might be a competitive race as well. And, I'm sure there will be other elections around the province that we flag for various points of interest.
Well, can we flag a couple provincial ones?
Yeah, let's do it.
By-elections coming up, right?
That's right. We've got by-elections in Scarborough Southwest, of course, which we have perhaps discussed to death on this podcast already. But that by-election does need to be called. And of course, there's another vacancy in the legislature with Carolyn Mulrooney announcing her retirement from provincial politics. I would say like retirement for now. So a by-election will have to be called there. I think the sort of common sense, at least among the gallery, is that the premier will likely call those by-elections before the House returns in October. It would be conventional enough if we saw like a mid or late August by-election, that kind of thing. But one of the hitches in whatever the government might have been planning on this is that the Toronto Star reported last week that the Tories have lost their candidate in Scarborough Southwest. They were hoping to run former city councillor Gary Crawford again. He has opted not to.
Took a pass, I think, is the way.
Yes, took a pass. Yeah. And so the Progressive Conservatives have to go and find themselves another candidate. Fortunately for them, the government controls the timing of by-elections, so they've got some flexibility there.
There you go. So that's our wind-up from what has transpired over the past 6 months to the look ahead in the summertime, and now we move on.
Yes.
Off to issue 2. Just because the legislature is not sitting doesn't mean the business of government stops. In fact, Premier Doug Ford has been touring the United States this week, trying to see if his version of Fortress North America to an American audience can be sold. He's talking to senators, governors, representatives, but of course, ultimately, he's talking to an audience of one, President Donald Trump. How's that going?
Not so great. So let's start with the premier is selling this vision of Fortress North America. This is a slightly revised version of the pitch from last year, which was Fortress Can-Am, right? The idea that the Canadian and American economies would, I guess, jettison Mexico and build a northern continental superpower. That message went nowhere last year. Spoiler alert, it does not seem to have done great so far this year. Ford, was calling this a message to the American people. There's a whole white paper, so to speak, that the province published on its website that people can look at. It doesn't replace the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, or CUSMA, I think is what we're going with.
USMACA.
Yes, USMACA, CUSMA, because, of course, provincial policy can't revise or affect the federally negotiated trade agreement. Whatever the Premier was hoping to achieve with this sales pitch, it seems to have landed on deaf ears, because Trump this week has said that he's not inclined to renew CUSMA. That deadline is coming up on July 1st, whether to announce the renewal or not. The decision not to renew doesn't immediately invalidate the agreement or anything like that. It just sends it into this weird limbo period. So clearly, the Premier's sales pitch did not reach the most important audience, I guess. But I think the obvious political context to mention here is that I think a lot of Canadian policymakers are waiting to see what happens with the U.S. midterms, these congressional elections for the House and a third of the Senate, and to see whether the Republican Party takes the beating that many current polls suggest they will, and then what lessons people in Washington take from that, right? If the Republican Party sees Donald Trump as having led them to a historic defeat in elections, then they might start to show a bit more independence as envisioned by the founders, with separate branches and all that. But that is all still, up in the air, and we're not going to know what those results are until November. And so I think, Mark Carney, for example, Prime Minister Mark Carney has said that Trump's remarks this week were not a huge surprise, and they're going to just sort of take every day as it comes.
Well, I think what constitutes partial success anyway for Doug Ford when he takes these trips to the United States is getting on American media.
Yes.
And he's done a pretty good job of doing that. In fact, one of his, I suspect, more shared on social media interviews was on CNN. So let's show a little bit of that, okay? Yeah. Doug Ford and Wolf Blitzer.
Fortress North America is about encouraging people to invest more in both countries. And when they invest more, we're going to see more production, more jobs, lower costs. That's what we need to focus on. We have two of the greatest countries in the entire world. And when we work together, there's nothing that can stop us. China can't stop us, and we need to keep moving forward.
What I found interesting about that comment was whom he did not blame for the fact that this is not happening.
Yes.
Trump's name did not come up.
No, it did not name the president directly, but did allude to, I think, maybe the most salient part of Trump's second term so far, which is the chaos and the unpredictability.
Mm-hmm. Should we hear some more from this?
Yes.
Okay, once again, Wolf Blitzer and Doug Ford.
The biggest challenge right now, Wolf, is the uncertainty.
The uncertainty in the U.S.-Canadian relationship.
100%. There's no investment when there's uncertainty.
I don't know that one trip to the United States to do tons of media can help deal with that uncertainty, but to the extent that he tried, how did he do?
I think you've got to say that this trip did not accomplish a ton. Just again, going back to Trump saying that he would not renew CUSMA, and not just that he said it, but how he said it. He said, we don't need anything from Mexico. We don't need anything from Canada. They need everything from us, right? Not truly a positive start. I do also want to add that the Globe and Mail reports that one of Ford's events was canceled at the behest of the White House. Premier Ford was supposed to speak to, I believe, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and apparently somebody close to the president leaned on them very hard to get the event canceled. So again, not clear to me that the Premier accomplished everything he wanted to. I guess I'll just leave it at that. That said, a trip to D.C. is not the only way to influence U.S. politics. One thing that did come out this week also was that Ontario and the state of Pennsylvania signed a memorandum of understanding.
I have to jump in.
Yes. the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Very good. Well done.
See, I caught it. This is like Lieutenant Governor all over again.
That's right.
So a memorandum of understanding was signed, and they made a whole news event out of it. Premier Ford representing Ontario and Governor Josh Shapiro representing the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
There we go.
The MOU includes items about cooperating on areas like energy, critical minerals, advanced manufacturing, agriculture, and more. The partnership would be done through activities like webinars. This is just the most stirring public policy one can imagine. Webinars, Steve. But this is not a binding legal agreement. It's an agreement by two governments to basically play nice together. It's valuable.
Good photo op.
It's a good photo op. And what was noteworthy, or at least one of the things that was a bit more noteworthy there, Governor Shapiro did directly address Canadians, saying, I understand that a lot of you are angry because of the behavior and the words of the president, and you have a right to your anger, basically. I think he just hopes that we don't hold it against Pennsylvania, and maybe if Canadian tourists wanted to visit Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, he would be happy to have us. Yeah. That was nice to hear from an elected official, of course. The other thing I would note here is that Shapiro is, of course, a rising star in the Democratic Party. He was on the short list for Kamala Harris's vice presidential slot. He did not get it. Tim Walz ended up getting it. But I don't think anybody thinks that is the end of Shapiro's political ambitions in higher office. And maybe it's good for Ontario that somebody like Shapiro comes to Queen's Park, has a chat with the premier. Shapiro is a smart guy. I'm sure it's not like he's forgotten that Ontario exists on the other side of the lake there. But these kinds of small interactions are they're an important part of politics.
I think if he gets the Democratic presidential nomination, he should ask the president and CEO of the Toronto Blue Jays to be his vice presidential candidate on the ticket, so we could have a Shapiro and Shapiro ticket running for president next time. No, I'm just being silly. How about one last thing on this, and that is booze. It is fascinating to me how Doug Ford taking Kentucky bourbon off the shelves of the LCBO has still become a huge irritant between the two countries. And what's the premier had to say about that?
I think, is Pennsylvania one of those states that also has a alcohol monopoly at the state level? I'm going to get distracted. You're right. This has been frankly, an outsized irritant to the Americans. I am so confused about what does and does not become like a salient point in these kinds of things. But yeah, we've heard, the members of Trump's cabinet saying like this is a big sticking point. Of course, there's like a lot of confusion. They seem to not understand that like Canada has provinces, and like you can't yell at Mark Carney to get alcohol back on the shelves in Ontario.
Not my department, people. Yeah.
So Ford did say this week that like he'd be happy to put American booze back on the shelves the moment the tariffs are gone, right? The moment that the threat of economic pain recedes. The Americans, of course, want the booze back on the shelves before they give up on the tariffs. So we are in a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Once again, I'll just point like Trump saying that he's not looking to renew CUSMA. It seems to me very clear at the moment that the U.S. administration and at least some of its supporters, they're not willing to back down. Ford's not willing to back down. I don't think we're going to see American booze back on those shelves at the LCBO anytime soon.
And with that, let's get off to issue 3 and talk about this guy. We have had 26 premiers of Ontario since Confederation, but only one was from Sault Ste. Marie. And as a result, you won't be surprised to hear that premier is of particular interest to the current mayor of Sault Ste. Marie. His name is Matthew Shoemaker, and he joins us now here in studio. Very appropriately attired, I might add.
Yes.
I'm
yes.
delighted to see you got the memo about how we sort of dress differently here. So what are you wearing?
I've watched the pod every now and then.
Excellent.
So I've got on me a Roberta Bondar's flight badge from her flight into space in 1992. We're talking about great Suites today with Premier Hearst, and so I wanted to celebrate another great Suite in Roberta Bondar.
And for younger people who may not remember her great achievement was
First female Canadian astronaut in space, first neurologist in the world in space, and an all-around gifted and high-achieving Suite.
And
outstanding.
there's an aviation museum in Sault Ste. Marie named after her, if I remember correctly.
There is an aviation museum in Sault Ste. Marie, the Bushplane Museum,
Oh, okay.
but there is also the head of the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation is named the Roberta Bondar Place in Sault Ste. Marie. Right across the street is Roberta Bondar Pavilion, which is a municipal park, and so she's admired locally.
Who's the airport named after?
Well, the road into the airport is named after Roberta
There you
Bondar,
go.
Dr. Roberta Bondar Way.
We are here to talk about this, which is a book on that premier we talked about, who is from Sault Ste. Marie, the one and only. But before we do that, we need to travel with me, if you will, Mayor Shoemaker, because we're going to put some pictures up here, which may or may not be of interest to you. Let's, what should we start with? There we go. That's now, in the interest of full disclosure here, I was up in the Sioux at your kind invitation a couple of weeks ago because you launched this book on Premier Hearst. And what are we looking at here?
This is Hearst's house. This is right at the corner of Queen and Upton in Sault Ste. Marie, and Hearst built that in 1914 just as he was becoming premier. Lived in it, or owned it through his premiership. He lived in Toronto for a significant portion of that time, but his wife and family and mother-in-law lived there while he was premier.
Do you know what was hilarious? You and I knocked on the door of the people who live there and said, "Hi, we're just here to see the house." And they let us in and they gave us a great tour. That was wonderful. Next picture, please. Okay, there they are.
There we are, yeah, with the owners.
In their beautiful living room. And that's where the premier lived back in the day.
Yeah, that was the seating area.
Can I ask, I mean, when you knock on the door, do they recognize you as the mayor, or did they not know you from Adam?
They
No, they knew who I was. Yeah, they knew who I was, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next picture, please. All right, so it's an historic home now, right?
Yes, designated heritage property in Sault Ste. Marie.
There we go. That plaque is on the front of the house, so very nice. Next picture, please. All right, that's the book launch. And you can see the mayor has figured out that when you're promoting a book, you always are photographed with the book, and there it is in his hand. Who are you there with?
That's the mayor of Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, who coincidentally, the only time we've had a premier, or sorry, not the only time anymore, but for the longest time, the only premier from Northern Ontario was from Sault Ste. Marie,
Right.
Premier Hearst. At the same time, there was a governor, the only governor in Michigan's history from the Upper Peninsula, was from Sault, Michigan, and their terms coincided.
Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. Okay, and we have one last picture, and that's where the great man is buried. And of course, Mayor Shoemaker, you and I, at least once, maybe a couple times, I can't remember now, have gone to Mount Pleasant Cemetery, which is about a 20-minute walk from here. And that's his final resting place.
Yeah.
And that's kind of hallowed ground for you in a way, isn't it?
We visited. I left. It's not there anymore, but I left a city flag right next to the headstone, and Hearst's final resting place.
Beautiful. All right, let's talk about this book. This, we'll do a little history of the story of the book here, because you didn't write this book, but you wrote the introduction for this book. But this book has been published, No Regrets, The Rise and Fall of Sir William Hearst. This book has been published because of an intervention by you. Explain how this came about.
So, as I was studying history, high school and university, my undergraduate is partially in history. I've also got a poli-sci undergraduate, but my interest in history has always been I've always been a keen
Nerd is the word you're looking
yes,
for.
that's right. Amateur historian, I like to say. And so my interest in Sioux history led me to come across the name Hearst, but in a very poorly defined way. There was not much written about him. But as I dug into it, I kept seeing one name come up, and that was Brian Douglas Tennyson. He had written a number of articles on him. And then I kept seeing reference, as I was looking through the footnotes of those articles, to a thesis. So when I was a student at University of Ottawa, I went to Library and Archives Canada, found the old thesis on microfiche.
Which he wrote when?
1963.
Okay, so it's been around for a while.
I was in Ottawa in 2009 to 12. So tracked down Professor Tennyson in Halifax and contacted him. He sent me a onion skin copy of the thesis from 1963, which I proceeded to then retype, because it did not exist in soft copy, page by page, footnote by footnote. I retyped the document and asked him if we could attempt to publish it. After successive efforts that were unsuccessful, he decided, along with me, that we would re-research or update, I would say, the research in the book, add an introduction, add some historical context from the time of 1963 to present, and that is what you have before us today.
Simple follow-up question. Why do all this?
Well, I've always said that it's important to celebrate people from your community who have done great things. Premier Hearst did one of the most interesting things, I think, that anyone can do, and that is he had an integral role in some of the most important historical elements of Ontario history, and I'm sure we'll get to those at some point. But so little was known about him locally. Obviously, more broadly, provincially, so little is known about him. And I was committed to correcting that oversight, and was glad that I could track down Professor Tennyson, who was, when I tracked him down, in his late 70s and is now in his late 80s, but was willing to work with me on ensuring that this story got told.
So let's talk about some of Hearst's accomplishments. Before he was premier, he was the Minister for Northern Ontario and negotiated with the federal government to create the northwestern border with Manitoba. I think there's still some people in Manitoba who are salty about how that line was drawn up, but that's kind of a big deal.
Well, Ontario's land mass was increased by 56% because of the negotiation he had with his countervailing minister in Manitoba at the time. And we think of the area north of Thunder Bay and the James Bay coast as being part of Ontario nowadays. It wasn't the case. It was, kind of it was broadly known as the Northwest Territories back then, or the Keewaydin District. And that got added to Ontario's landmass. That increased our size by, like I say, 56%. More than half of our province got added when Hearst was the Minister of Lands, Forests and Mines.
It's interesting. Northern Ontario back then was not referred to as Northern Ontario. It was called New Ontario.
New Ontario, the area that, the area of the Sioux and Sudbury and North Bay and Thunder Bay. And then beyond that, it was kind of hinterland, the Keewaydin District, they called it, of course, at the time. But now you would call it Cochrane, named after Frank Cochrane, who features prominently in the book, and then the James Bay coast.
Hearst, I mean, if for nothing else, I think Hearst is interesting to study because he has an utterly unique set of circumstances upon which he becomes the Premier of Ontario. And that is, we've had 26 premiers, but only one, Hearst, who came into office because his predecessor died in office. James Whitney in 1914, September of 1914. So, okay.
Heck of a time to take government.
Well, yeah, beginning of World War I, right, exactly. So just we obviously don't have, like in the United States, when the president dies, the vice president is constitutionally there to take over. We have none of that. So how did they figure out that Hearst should become premier?
Well, nowadays you would either have a vote of the membership of the governing party, or you would have a caucus vote. And what they did at the time was Whitney knew he was in failing health, and so he left a letter. And there were factions within the party. There was the faction behind Adam Beck. There was the faction behind Howard Ferguson. And Whitney thought that neither of those factions would accommodate the other being the premier, and so recommended Hearst for the job. And so he had the backing of Whitney, who was incredibly well respected in the party and by the caucus.
But dead.
And politics played a role in it. He came to govern a divided caucus and left a divided caucus after him. I think that his tenure and his loss is largely reflective of the fact that he wasn't able to, there are a number of other circumstances as well, but largely because of the fact that he couldn't present a united front in his party.
I mean, you talked about his exit there. You alluded to his loss there. But before we get to that, the fact that he didn't win a vote in caucus or cabinet, did that affect his legitimacy while he was premier?
It I think it always had a deleterious effect. Adam Beck was a constant thorn in his side, who ultimately became the head of, whatever it's now called, but OPG, I think at the time, Ontario Power
he's the
Generation.
father of Ontario Hydro.
Yeah, Ontario Hydro.
Big statue for him on University Avenue.
And yet none of Premier Hearst, but nevertheless.
Are you bitter?
No, not at all. So Hearst ultimately, as he was, undertaking these really difficult issues, and I mean, we'll get to some of the important ones, but the right to vote for women, which was recognized under Hearst's tenure, support for conscription, which was strongly advocated for in Hearst's tenure, the expansion of the power supply in Ontario, which was advocated for in Hearst's tenure, and Adam Beck was also promoting, but they were really coming at it in different ways, and there were allegations really that Adam Beck tried to undermine the success or the above boardness of many of the projects that Hearst ultimately ended up wearing responsibility for.
Well, let me add one more thing to the list. You point out he gave women the right to vote in the province of Ontario. He also brought in prohibition, which did not go over particularly well in some circles and was thrown out after only one term in office. And I wonder whether you think those three things are connected.
So I think the book ultimately concludes, and I think that history has found that there was an expectation on his part that extending the right to vote to women would help him electorally. And it wasn't done for electoral reasons, at least not entirely, I don't think. It was done because Hearst was very conservative. At the beginning of his time in office, he didn't think that society had gotten to the point where the right to vote should be extended to women. But throughout the war effort that women put in factories and in other industries, he gradually came to the conclusion that the right to vote should be extended to women. I think a secondary thought was that this would help him politically. It would expand the base of the voting public, and those who had been extended the right to vote presumably would reward the premier who extended that right to them. But it was not to be. He also had a very difficult relationship with farmers in the province, ultimately was defeated by the United Farmers of Ontario, and was his own Minister of Agriculture, which I think the book would say, and history has shown, hurt him substantially because he didn't have a grasp on the file.
Although he grew up on a farm, didn't he?
He grew up on a farm, but he left quite young. He was 15 by the time he left the home and never looked back. He became a metropolitan and, lived in the Sioux for much of his adult life. But then he ultimately lost to the farmers, and I think evidence is that farmers' wives voted the way the farmers did and ultimately led to his demise.
It's interesting, just a brief digression to that temperance, prohibition, whatever you want to call it, and female suffrage moved together in so many areas of politics. Certainly in the U.S., they were very much considered linked issues. But I will belabor that point. The book on Hearst up until now is that he wasn't really worthy of a book because he was this transitional figure, right, between the very successful but late James Whitney and then the United Farmers government and the breach that they represented. Clearly, I don't think you see that as a fair verdict in history.
No, absolutely not. I think that he came to office in September 1914, which, as you said, is the very beginning of World War I. Yeah. He governed the province through the entirety of World War I, guided it through the conscription challenge that was facing the province at the time, and lended great support to Robert Borden's government to get through those difficult times. He advocated for Ontario to do its part in the war effort. I mean, there was the use of Ontario nickel in bullets. There was the use of other Ontario industries, including Algoma Steel and Sault Ste. Marie, to make defense items and to assist in the war effort. And he spearheaded much of that from the premier's chair, and was transformational in the other decisions that he made. I think prohibition, as we would probably look upon it and say it was a failure, was transformational and still is transformational to the way that the province sells liquor. I mean, you've got Premier Ford to this day changing aspects of what was ultimately put in place during Hearst's time in office with, liberalization of liquor sales. And that's all...
but still defending the centrality of the government liquor wholesale monopoly.
which arose out of the Prohibition era, which Hearst enacted. And then obviously the extension of the right to vote to women, the expansion of Ontario's landmass by 50+%, I think is all reasons that this was a transformational figure in Ontario's history, and the story deserved to be told.
Okay, let me play Killjoy for a second here. And yet, in spite of all that, the guy loses an election in 1919 to a group of farmers who were barely a constituted political party and didn't even have a leader. And he lost to them. Take a sip before you answer. Yes, indeed. How did that happen?
Well, I'm going to point to another historic figure who lost the election after guiding their country through a war, and that was Sir Winston Churchill. And so he's in good company, I would say, to say that the societal change that was stirred up by the First World War meant that he was left in the rearview mirror after the war was over. I mean, he brought in a mother's allowance. He brought in I don't want to say a GI Bill because that's an American term, but very much an effort to retrain and place troops who were back home back into the workforce. And so he had a great effect on being able to guide and usher society into the post-war era, but he was not the leader for the post-war era, as Ontario ultimately decided. And I think that doesn't change the fact that his term in office was transformational and continues to have an effect on Ontario to this day.
Here in Toronto, the civic holiday in August is called Simcoe Day,
yes,
after John Graves Simcoe. In Burlington, it's called Joseph Brant Day because he was significant in that part of Ontario. What's it called where you're from?
Sir William Hearst Day, and that's an effort that I spearheaded when I was first elected to council. I was elected in 2014 as a city councillor, and in 2015 brought forward a motion to find an appropriate recognition for Hearst, who I had just earlier in the year before that gotten put into the Sault Ste. Marie Walk of Fame. And so ultimately a committee of students and counselors and other community advocates was put together, and we decided that the civic holiday should be renamed in Hearst's honor.
Okay, so that's the book on Hearst. While we have you here, we want to take advantage of the fact that we want to talk about some other...
Still an Ontario Politics podcast.
Right. You are.
So contemporary politics.
Yeah, let's do a little contemporary politics here. And admittedly, this question is going to be a little bit sticky, but your city has a member of the Ontario legislature who was elected as a progressive conservative member, but now sits as an independent because the premier kicked him out of caucus because of some, what do we say? Well, he's been charged with an offense related to his domestic situation. Has that development had an impact on the Sioux's ability to get attention at Queen's Park?
I would say yes, it undoubtedly has. I have been grateful to the Premier's office and his staff, his cabinet ministers, and himself, who have, I would say, reached out fairly regularly. But, I've never been a member of the Ontario legislature. I've never sat in a caucus meeting. I don't know how they operate, but I have to imagine that having a member from the Sioux in those meetings and in the legislature would only help our cause when Sioux issues come up. I mean, there is a lot of outreach after the fact, and there's a lot of outreach to ensure that Sioux issues aren't forgotten about. But I think that it has undoubtedly hurt us.
Now, you mentioned that you've never sat as an MPP, but that's not because you weren't pursued. Back in 2017, the Liberal Party under Kathleen Wynne invited you to run. You declined, and you've done well for yourself nevertheless. But the next provincial election is likely to be in, I guess, what would be year 7 of your time as mayor. And right before a municipal election, you might have some decisions to make. Any interest in following Hearst into provincial politics?
Well, I think that there is lots of opportunity for Siouxites to do great things in politics. I'm trying to do great things at the municipal level. We'll find out in the fall if my community thinks that those things are sufficient enough to re-elect me, and I'll focus on my mayoralty for the term ahead of me until future decisions have to be made.
That's called a non-denial denial.
It's not the Sherman statement, right?
No. Yes.
If nominated, I will not run.
If elected, I will not serve. Yes. No, it's not quite like that. Your Worship, we are really grateful to you for making the long trek down from, although it's only an hour and change flight, right? It's not that far.
1 hour, 1 minute.
There you go. There we go. I did say an hour and change. Yeah, the change is a minute. Anyway, congratulations.
I've had subway rides that are longer than that.
That's right. That's true, actually, isn't it? Yeah. Those of us who are also history nerds are grateful to you for having the stick-to-itiveness to get this thing done. And I've read it, and it's a terrific book, and you've made a real contribution to those who want to have a better understanding of who we are today and why we are the way we are. So well done. I'm happy to show the camera. There we go. No Regrets, The Rise and Fall of Sir William Hearst. Matthew Shoemaker, thanks so much. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, it's time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the stuff we wrote for TVO.org over the past week. What you got for us?
I'm going to return to this issue of Premier Ford's visit to D.C. and the sales pitch for Fortress North America that seems to have landed a bit flat. I mentioned the White House pressuring the Chamber of Commerce to drop the Premier's event. That, to me, says that as much as we would like to pretend that we're having good faith negotiations between parties of mutual interest, that's not what we're looking at. The current American administration has decided it just does not want any part of these negotiations. It does not want to find a fair agreement, and we should be honest about that and move forward. I think, was it Franklin Roosevelt's quote about, the forces of great wealth hate me and I welcome their hatred.
Yes.
I think, Doug Ford can either accept for now that this current administration hates us and he can welcome their hatred, or he can try and basically go the appeasement route, for lack of a better word. But this Fortress North America pitch just is not working. And so that's what I wrote about this week.
Doesn't appear to be so far. I, as you know, have had my eye on all of the people who are throwing their hat into the Ontario Liberal Leadership Contest coming up later this year in November. And the guy I did a column on this past week is actually the guy who was the first one to get greenlit by the Ontario Liberal Executive, and his name is Dylan Miranda. And I'm willing to bet that 95% of the people watching this right now or listening to it say, Dylan Miranda, who's Dylan Miranda? And you'd be quite right to ask that because he's never stood for office before. He is not, I should say provincially at any rate. He hasn't run for a provincial seat for the Ontario Liberals. He's a guy, though, who has a great deal of experience in the back rooms. Yes. He's been a senior policy advisor to Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne and Justin Trudeau. And he's a young guy. He actually reminds me a lot of Dalton McGuinty. He's kind of a young, earnest guy who, very policy focused, has a kind of a nice guy, vibe about him. And, he's raised $100,000 so far, which is not chump change. That's pretty good if you're intending to convey that you're a serious candidate for the job. The funny thing about him is, and this is the first question I asked him, your name's Dylan Miranda. You're not named after the singer, are you? And he says, yeah, my dad was a 60s hippie who loved Bob Dylan. And he is named after Bob Dylan. And I thought about having as a campaign slogan, the times they are a-changin', but thought that might get him into some copyright trouble. So
yes.
Anyway, Dylan Miranda, it's funny, I asked him, you look very young. How old are you? And he said, I'm the same age David Peterson was when he won the Liberal leadership. So 38, incidentally. And that's, it's not unprecedented for somebody in their 30s to become the leader of the party. So there you go. Dylan Miranda, on the website, tvo.org, if you want to find out more about him.
All right, shall we go to the mailbag?
Let's do that. If you've got a burning question or an insightful comment, we always love hearing from you at onpolitics@tvo.org. Okay, JMM, fire away.
Right, so this was a bit of a longer letter from Bob Ernest of Waterloo. So we are trimming it down a little bit, but he wrote about your recent piece about Howard Moscow. He writes, Steve, I enjoyed your column on Howard Moscow. My memories of Howard the Maverick predate his entry into municipal politics. Back in the 1970s, I was a delegate from Waterloo District to the annual meetings of the Ontario Public School Men's Teachers Federation, as the Union of Male Elementary Teachers was called. Howard was a delegate from North York and became the unofficial leader of the opposition questioning the actions of the establishment union executive. He and the North York delegation sponsored resolutions year after year to have discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation be banned in the hiring practices of school boards. This, of course, was a time when being out carried enormous legal penalties.
Sure.
Bob letter continues. In many ways, Howard was a maverick in the teaching profession who had a lasting impact. Today, gay teachers have their jobs protected, whereas back in the 70s, an openly gay teacher could be and was fired just for being gay.
Bob, I'm really glad you wrote that letter because it does remind us that, Howard Moscoe got a lot of attention because of, how do I want to put this? He did indulge in antics from time to time, and he did say some, strange things in order to get some attention for the causes he believed in. And it would therefore be reasonable for people to say, yes, you're a maverick, but your behavior doesn't cut it all the time. But this is a reminder that his maverickness was based in real stuff and in issues that he thought were really important to bring to the public's attention that he didn't think others at that time were championing. And so this is a great reminder that at the base of it all, Howard Moscoe really gave a damn about some important issues.
He did. And I like the reminder that until shockingly recently, certainly within, I was born a bit after the 70s, but, still within my lifetime, there were legal formal forms of discrimination against gays and lesbians in Canada that we have, for the most part, jettisoned. And, it's easy to become too cynical, as I've alluded to sometimes on this podcast. But, there is such a thing as progress, too.
My friend, give the email address and let's get out of here.
Right. Once again, if you'd like to ask about content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
And that is the OnPoli podcast for this Friday, June the 12th, 2026.
You can follow our show wherever you get your podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the extended video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to get it, good, bad, or indifferent. If you like the podcast on TV for an hour, you can let us know that too. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please be sure to include your first and last name and where you're from.
This week's episode was produced by Tiff Lamb, editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Laura Few is the executive producer of Digital. Vanessa Case is vice president media.
We always like to thank the crew here in the studio and, of course, in the control room as well for making the podcast look so good, sound so good. Guys, we've enjoyed doing yet another wonderful season of the OnPoli podcast with all of you. You guys, what would the premier say, JMM? You guys are a bunch of champions. That's exactly right. That's our last show of the season. Until next fall, everybody. JMM, little sugar for the road. There we go, pal. Have a great summer. We'll see you all in the fall.
Bye-bye.